Hello again, everybody. I'm back. So are you all ready for another confusing demonstration with contorted ideas? I mean, expert instruction. That's what you're going to get. Or that's what I'm aiming for. I said that to be funny, but also because the topic I want to talk about today is kind of that. What do you do when you want to paint something, but you're really a little unsure about how to get a handle on it, how to approach it, how to frame it, how to crop it, what to emphasize, what to play down? All these things are a way to talk about design, which is what I do, which is what we all do when we set out to do a painting. We design it. And design is the process of deciding what to put in your project, your painting in this case, and what not to, what to leave out, what to emphasize, what to play down. So where in the world we are, this is a photograph of a street corner really in Venice, Italy. Now Venice is probably the most over-painted, over-romanticized place on planet Earth, but there's a good reason for that, because it really is impossibly compelling and beautiful. I've been there a number of times, and I feel fortunate for that. But enough so that I've been able to sort of analyze what is it about this place that's so compelling to artists, musicians, writers, dancers, etc. throughout time. And I think it's many things, but it's an improbable city in the first place. If you know anything about its history, it really shouldn't exist. It's largely just a floating city, largely built on pilings and all this effort, all this physical beauty on this sort of rather barbaric but poetic beginnings. It's just a beautiful city, and its beauty runs much deeper than just the things we look at. And I think that's what it does. It taps into this idea of beauty in all of us. I believe that as painters, or any kind of people that try to make art, you don't go out and find beauty in the world and try to represent it so much as you find it within yourself, and you project it upon what it is you're looking at or thinking of or remembering or feeling. And that, I think, is one of the things that compels me so much about Venice, is that it triggers feelings in the present, but also memories from the past, projections into the future. It's great history. And anyway, I don't want to waste all my time talking about what makes Venice beautiful, but it's a topic worth thinking about. In any case, to bring it back to this subject, I'm always, not just in Venice, but everywhere I go, I like to try to paint, if I'm painting anything remotely attached to an actual place or a scene, I'm a little reluctant always to paint the big famous or obvious sites, but I look for things maybe a little out of the way, a little unexpected, perhaps that I might have walked by the day before and not noticed, that kind of thing. So what I love about this subject is I think it's kind of emblematic of a lot of things about Venice I love. And one of those things is the sense of openness and enclosure. The experience of walking through Venice is like nowhere else I've ever been. Sound changes as you go under bridges, you walk through these arcades, you come out into the open, the sound changes, the light changes, of course, and it's all this modulation of stimuli and experience that really make the city feel so kinetic and so alive. Of course, the sense of time passing, it's very compelling. So this particular little sort of an average corner, but packed into this is the sense of enclosure, the arcade and the archway over the bridge. Openness, the open air, the negative space, contrasting with the positive shapes, the volume and the voids, the way light dances around, bouncing off the water, illuminating the undersides of arches, throwing things into dramatic shadows. All these things collide. And then I love this sense of stairways, walkways, stairways, waterways, bridges, arcades, open sidewalks, all these just different experiences of moving through an urban environment really are things that excite me and get me excited. But okay, so I talk a lot about what's your intent? What is it you're trying to paint? I try to not ever paint things so much, like literal illustrations of things, as much as I try, sometimes better than others, to paint my experience of those things. So I want this painting I'm doing for you today to be not an illustration of things or architectural identities or identities of a city, but really emblematic of an experience, my experience, and I think of many others too at this glorious city. So that said, I want to get a sense of the openness, the enclosure, the solid, the void, the volume, the open space. I want to get a hint looking through some of this arcade to some of the open sky beyond. Again, some of the enclosed bits, the stairways leading up here. I'm going to add some steps leading down to the water, and there are steps leading up to the bridge, but you can't see them in this photo, so I'm going to redesign that a bit so that you can. Then I'm going to crop this a little differently to make a vertical image more like this. Let's tighten in on this, zoom in a bit. I did a very quick value composition study. So I want to make it a vertical composition, just to tighten it up, get a little closer, but then set up this connection between heaven and earth, if you will, between the sense of the ground and the sense of the vast open space beyond, to add a little bit more dynamic overall contrast to my story. As most photographs, especially digital photographs, show, they're a landmine for us if we try to paint from them, because they tend to flatten out all the values or unify. It's just a collision of lights and darks and midtones. Everything, if I painted it just like it appeared in the photograph, everything would look pretty flat and one-dimensional. So I want to build up a hierarchy of dark values, which will be the dark sides of the columns with light coming largely this way. So this will be quite dark, this will be quite dark, light in between, a shadow being cast over the steps, which on the day I took this photograph wasn't really there. It was a pretty overcast day. But I think in brighter sun, this value story and this contrasting rhythm I'm trying to build up of light, dark, light, dark, light, dark will come through more clearly. So I'm going to invent some sun, cast an angle of light this way. So light, midtone, dark, light. Then I want to bring light into the distance there, under the bridge here. Quite different than what the photo shows. A little bit of light here in the pavement. Much of the painting will be midtones, which I call 2. And then 3, my darkest darks, just be here, part of the shadow, here, the backside of this wall. And I'm going to drop in a figure here just to flesh out that dark shape, but also to animate the image a little bit as well. And I'm putting in a few figures, smaller, less important, but just to animate the space and give it a little more texture so it doesn't look so much like a technical or architectural drawing. So figures in the distance on the bridge and a main figure standing here. So it should work. Just to recap, yeah, I always build up my paintings in 3 basic values: lights, darks, midtones. And then I think a lot about spatial differentiation in my paintings: foreground, midground, background. You don't have to assign a value to each of those distances, but it's good to think about them. Design a value system that emphasizes a sense of a foreground, a midground, and a background, so that your paintings don't look flat and one-dimensional. We're painting on a flat, one-dimensional piece of paper, two-dimensional piece of paper. We have height and width. So anything we can do to amplify or telegraph this illusion of depth and perspective and three-dimensionality, I am addicted to, and I think it's well worth looking at and trying to do. So this just helps organize the sort of chaos of values that the reference photo gives me. So about an hour ago, I started this drawing. It's a combination of loose and tight, mostly pretty tight. I did use a straight edge to get some of these things sketched in. I wanted to be a little careful because I wanted some technical clarity, because I intend to paint it fairly loose and washy over the top. So I'm hoping that the contrast of the somewhat more precise drawing and the somewhat more loose painting will be a nice marriage. But yeah, it follows my my layout pretty closely in terms of format, cropping a little bit more sky showing through here than the photo shows, a little hint at the steps going up there and the steps going down there. So it begins to tell this story of a change in elevation, and to emphasize this kind of sub-story of different ways of moving through the city. A flat plane, the little stairway, another flat plane, more stairs, all these various levels that just animate the city, and I want to animate my painting. So now, given that, I think I'll just hide the reference photo from myself, because it'll be a hindrance if I rely on that. It'll lead me down the wrong path. Now what I want to do is just start painting. As I always say, we don't paint light in watercolor, we reveal it. The light is all there on the surface of the paper. We paint the shades and the shadows that give light its identity. It's something you've got to remember in watercolor. It's transparent, so we don't paint with white paint or opaque paint the way we would in oil or acrylic perhaps. So it's a little bit inverse. We paint backwards in a sense. All the light, which is often the last thing to go on in a more opaque medium, not always, but often, is the first thing that goes on in a watercolor, because, yeah, it's already there. So what I want to do is isolate the light, or concentrate the saved light, the brightest lights in this area here, and then build up, when I'm done, a rhythm of the lightest lights and the darkest darks, all here in my center of interest. The rest of the painting will be largely mid-tone values. So I'm starting with just clear water and a mid-sized mop brush. These are one of my brushes, these Neef brushes made by Neef, Thomas W. Schaller brush. It's not a shameless plug exactly, although it kind of is, but if you don't own a mop of some kind, it doesn't have to be mine, but you should own one or two larger brushes that hold a lot of water. They're just invaluable for doing larger wet washes like this. I'm starting in with some a brighter yellow today, a Rulian yellow I'm using. Then I'm going to swap into this Daniel Smith permanent orange. I'm going for an overall pretty minimal palette of colors. This is a mineral violet I'm using by Holbein. It's very transparent, beautiful violet. It's not too bright purple, but it's a really nice complement toggle from the yellow, golden yellows into the violet. So I'm not painting material colors, I hope you can see. I'm just painting areas of light, dark and light. I'm painting all in midtones now. Not sure what happened there. It looks like the paper has a scar on it. But not to worry. It'll probably lighten up when it dries. And even if it doesn't, not a big deal. This is cobblestones or flagstones. I'll just do something clever to obscure that. I always urge people to fix your paper to a board, however you like to do it. But at any rate, don't be afraid to flip your board in different directions. Use gravity to your advantage. Doing the same kind of wash over the top of the sky. This is a bit of that permanent orange. It's just sort of a golden color, but it's mixed with a little of that cerulean yellow. So it's not really that orange. It really reads as a brighter yellow that's not too acidic. And again, at the top of the painting up into just sort of a light mid-toned violet. Again, I'm not painting material colors, colors of specific materials. What I'm doing is trying to isolate the light in the middle of the painting. This little Holbein mist bottle is a very handy tool and a good friend. If you don't overdo it, you can just lightly mist a wash like that. Use gravity, tilt your board up and down, left and right, if you wish, but it helps direct the flow of the paint. More gravity, it's going to flow quicker, of course. More flat, less gravity, is going to flow more slowly. But yeah, experiment with not painting with your paper flat on your easel or tabletop. It's a fluid medium, of course, so if you make friends with gravity, you can really end up with some beautiful results. Doing a simple, classic graded wash like that, with using gravity, you'll just get some nearly perfect transitions, and those beautiful tones complement tones running into each other, is where so much of the magic of watercolor can happen. It's a bit risky turning it right side up with the painting that wet, because that violet will likely leach down into the slightly drier areas below and may cause blossom or streak, so I'll have to monitor it. Wow. Yeah, that is a flaw in the actual paper, either a scratch or some inconsistency with the sizing in the paper. I'm not sure. My guess is that the surface of the paper was scuffed. I didn't notice it when I was drawing it, but there it is. It's still pretty wet, so I'm hoping some of that will just dry out. So at this stage, there's not much done, but you can see what I'm doing is I'm just isolating, again, the light. The darkest darks, the lightest lights will all happen here in my focal area, and the rest of the painting will have tones and color, but all in the mid-tone family. I'm going to use the hairdryer on the top of this just to speed up the drawing. Sorry for the interruption, but yeah, were I just here painting by myself, I would just let that air dry first, but just don't want to waste your time. So, next, I build up my paintings from lightest light to darkest dark. So much of the painting is just mid-tones. This kind of thing, getting darker and darker. Not a lot of glazes, so there is some of that. Try to keep it to a minimum, maybe 2 or 3 glazes. I think depending on the piece of paper, the paper can start to react badly and starts to look chalky and reject the paint if you try to layer on too many glazes on top. Here in the distance is a little bit of the city showing. I could leave this as all white, and this is an important area of light, so I don't want to eat it up too much. But I'm just going to lightly indicate with this pale yellow, maybe the city in the distance, and then feather it out. And just be as subtle as I can. Yes, you can paint with your finger. I can't pretend that's not bothering me because I'm just mystified as to what it is exactly. I've never seen anything quite like that. Huh, well, so be it. So the thing to do now is to paint the areas of painting that are farthest away, this little hint of the city in the distance. Then this building that shows up to the left, it's not unimportant because it's in the painting, but it's not as important as these elements. So a little darker than that, but not as dark or as contrasty as what I'm going to do here. Color-wise, I don't think it matters too much, but I'm going to keep it in the warm family. Just a darker version of this orange tone. This is a 1/2-inch flat brush, acrylic or synthetic, so it doesn't hold a lot of water, which is on purpose. So that I can just let it skim over the surface of the paper I'm using. And you'll get these characteristic dry brush marks, which make it look as if you're painting in a lot of detail, but in fact you're not. I thought I was painting on a piece of arches. I just found it in my flat files in my paper drawer of arches rough surface paper, but this is clearly not arches paper. This is something else that's found its way into my paper stash. An interloper. Well, anyway, it's okay. You'll get to see how I wrestle with unexpected issues. Yeah, I'm just running through my brain trying to think what would be in my storage cabinet other than bow-hung arches. I know I have some Fabriano. I know I have some vintage Wattman, but this doesn't appear to be that either. So yeah, I'm not certain what this paper is. So just a little glaze, tonal glaze on some of that. Not really a glaze because I used a flat brush, just some material indications. These columns are white marble, so I can make them any color I want, but I think I'll be somewhat true to that, meaning they'll have some blue in them, and that should vibe nicely with some of the oranges that appear elsewhere. You can see just a glimmer of sky between the two columns. It's hardly worth thinking about, but I probably tone the bottom of that down just a little. Really want to maximize the light, but yeah, that's fine, not a big deal. So this is just this weird assembly of rough cut stones, dress stones, very aged stuff, different colors, different textures. Beautiful as objects and things in and of themselves. But we're not really doing a building portrait, we're doing a painting. So here, for example, this might in reality be lighter, but I know that I want to keep light shining up from behind the bridge as if bouncing up off the water, so that the profile of this stone corner needs to be a little darker for that effect to work. That said, it's really not that dark. It might look a little dark, but it really isn't. So that's a little bit of cobalt blue to sort of give a nod to that marble coping stone, and then wash down into some browns. I'm using some raw umber and a little bit of sepia, just whatever's in my palette. The real mitigating factor, militating factor here is just trying to keep it darker than the lightest light, but not anywhere yet near the darkest dark. So fairly solidly mid-tone. These elements are a little bit more right in your face, so a little bit more clarity makes sense. And yeah, so what am I looking at? I'm not looking at the color as much as I'm looking at the value. Does the value look about right? And I believe that it does. So I'm going to do some version of that coming up on these standing columns too. If a little bit of glimmers of pure white show through, that's okay. So I'm using this 1/2 inch flat so that I can sort of start and stop and skip and leave little bits of glimmers of light and unpainted bits. The other thing about establishing this center of interest here is that it's where most of the more defined edges of the painting will happen. So more of the clarity will happen here. And then as these columns grow up, for example, or this building goes toward the edge of the page, I can allow my brush strokes to become less defined, fuzzier, more gestural. I really love it in a painting when you have a variety of brush marks of different styles that all work together nicely. It makes a more dynamic painting than if it were all painted with the exact same kind of brush marks, I think. So some of this is a little bit wet, so I'm dropping in a little bit additional color here and there and allowing it to bleed, just to try to enhance this patina of age and time that permeates everything about Venice. It also gives me the opportunity to take advantage of edges. Edges in watercolor are, some people say, everything. I don't know if they're everything, but they're certainly a thing. Nothing does edges as beautifully as watercolor can do. And that orchestration of edges in watercolor, the so-called found edges and lost edges, when they all work together, it's a really compelling combination. So as this goes down, it's getting into the area where I'm going to want to be adding my darkest darks, so I can just start to hint at the beginnings of them with using a little less water, a little bit more color, dropping in a little violet here. Again, at this stage, if this edge bleeds into that, I'm not worried. In fact, I want that to happen a little, again, to enhance that sense of age and patina and fuzzy edges that really are characteristic of Venice. There'll be crisper edges coming, so hopefully the combination of the two will look organic and correct. That kind of thing, just sort of intentional blossoms. Down here I see my hideous, whatever that birthmark was. It's beginning to fade quite a lot, so that's encouraging. But I guess as a lesson for myself and you, those kinds of things, I don't know. If it's a lesson, you just shouldn't worry about them. Stuff happens in watercolor, and I think we get into trouble often when we try too hard to control it, or we worry too much about being precise or perfect. Depends on how we paint and what our aesthetic is. But there is a compelling argument to be made for a watercolor that has a kind of combination of finesse, crisp cleanliness, and then also some areas like this that look unplanned and maybe even not on purpose or a mistake. It's not that bad. I have been painting for a million years. I do still struggle with fighting a tendency toward perfectionism. I don't even like saying it or admitting it, but it is true. So I really have to police myself often to sometimes paint a little faster, plan a little less for certain areas, think a little less, paint more from my heart and less from my brain, and allow space for unplanned, happy little accidents. They can be beautiful. So here I'm painting the face of the steps that are going to be in shade or shadow. And I'm using tones of raw umber, just basically warm and a little bit of violet. Just toggling between the two, trying to get a sort of mottled effect. These are very old steps, so I really don't want them to look too neat or clean. I'm using an 1/8 inch flat, so I can get some of these intentionally scruffier marks to imply some of the irregularities in the stone and the bits that are worn down. And all those old worn stones are so beautiful. And then in Venice, with everything so near the water, or half the time underwater, there's often these, I'm sure if you lived there and owned a building, it'd be a nightmare, but as just a visitor, these beautiful lichen and moss growing on everything. It really is just gorgeous. Again, if I owned a house there, which I dream about, I probably would be a miserable homeowner in Venice because of all the maintenance and the constant repairs that would be required. I'm trying to do this fairly quickly to get all these different shapes to have identity, but also to bleed into each other a little bit, to obscure a little bit some of the edges so everything feels a little more connected. Yeah, so far so good. I love doing paintings as demonstrations, and I love trying to explain what I'm doing while I'm doing it, but so I can paint and talk at the same time, obviously, but I often wonder if I do either of them that well. So I'm multitasking, but I think there are times when I need to be quiet and just concentrate a little. I have found sometimes I paint better when I'm a little bit distracted. Our minds are our friends, but they can be our enemies too when we overthink and we over plan, but when we overthink and get tight and rigid, it doesn't really works out well for any of us, I think, in a sort of intuitive, fluid medium like this. Learning ways of just relaxing and letting go help. So sometimes when I'm painting and talking, I can kind of paint from a more intuitive place while I'm badly, inarticulately trying to explain what I'm doing to all of you. But it's a good lesson for me. The other lesson I do all the time, whether I'm painting for anybody else or just alone, is breathe. Just don't forget to breathe. I know that sounds cliche or whatever, but it is so true. Years of my life I spent painting, just clutching my breath, and my shoulders were tight, my neck was tight. I clutched my paintbrushes like this. I painted with my fingers. When I started to just become conscious of my breath and just relax, my shoulders relaxed, my headaches went away, my neck aches went away, my chronic back aches stopped. But I also started painting more with my whole arm. I'm sitting down now, which is unusual. I generally stand up to paint so I can move around a lot. You paint with your whole body, or at least your whole arm, as much as possible, and it's quite amazing the positive effect that can have on not just how you paint, but what you paint and how you feel about what you're painting. So I recommend it. Whether you stand up, sit down, whatever you do, we can all become more conscious of our breathing. Just try to be conscious of breathing. When you do, you just instantly relax, and the paint flows so much easier. So here in this middle ground, these columns, picking up a bit of light on the left side and then get much darker on the left, but they're not, I don't want them to pull forward, so this area needs to get dark, but not overly so it may be a bit of a balancing act. I know what I have to do, we'll see how I get on, but I know this side wants to be toned, but not too dark. So I'm just going to dry brush on a little bit of pale cobalt blue, hopefully just enough to pop out that window of light. Then here, as it turns the corner, I can start to get a little darker. So this is sepia, or Van Dyke brown is quite similar, just a deeper brown tone. This is a little, the sepia's got a little green tinge to it. I almost wish I were using Van Dyke brown, but it's okay. I can warm it up with a little burnt sienna. I'm not aiming for the overall value range of this painting to be super dynamic. I want light, but I want it to be a slightly softer light. So to that end, what I mean is my darks don't have to be jet black in order to be effective. Well, you know you're in New York. I live on, I'm painting at home today. My studio is downtown, which is actually quieter than here. I live on the Upper East Side, which is generally a nice neighborhood and all, but we have a lot of hospitals, and that's a good thing, but wow, the sirens are omnipresent. So just here, near the center of interest, I'm going to drop some of this violet in at the bottom of this area to add a little bit of transparent depth of value. Just playing around with how dark I want to get that. I want to, even this, I want to keep it in the mid-tone family, but just at the bottom, probably the darker end of the mid-tones. I'll turn it upside down and let some of that run. Yeah, I didn't want to cause a line here. I may have waited a bit too long. No, it's okay. Ooh. So that's some burnt sienna, probably too much burnt sienna, but not a problem. And then I want a golden streak up at the top of the distant archways, so a bit more of this orange. I don't want to make that big of a deal out of it, but I did want to get just the illusion that there's a bit of a reflected light in these upper portion of these arches. What happens over here, visually everything kind of collapses. So I'll drop in a little blue, a little violet, a little bit of everything. Just treat it more neutrally. I'm painting on a bit more slant than I typically do for these videos, because I really want to be able to use gravity with this painting. So if light's coming in here, the bottom portion of this arcade wouldn't probably be as dark as that side, of course, but I don't want to leave it pure white. So I want to go back to the this golden transparent orange, and I'm just going to dry brush a few marks up into that bluer violety shadowy area. So there's some streaks of light, and I think that's good, but I think that's enough. Yeah, not bad. Now the goal is just to not touch it. So I think overall I'm happy with this, but I think this bottom portion, when that dries a bit, probably wants a little more value. I like the glow at the top and the shadowy areas, this upper part of the arcade melting down into a more luminous part at the bottom. Makes sense to me. I like the way some of this dark bled into that. love that effect. So that was not really planned, but I think good luck. And then you get some really nice, warm, cool transitions that, again, the thing that watercolor does so beautifully. I painted around these figures in the distance. I don't know that I want to leave them all light, but I think this one figure standing in the shadows may want a little glint of light on her. I just wanted to leave myself the option to do that. This guy is more in the light, but I think he will read better if he's mostly darker. So he's not the star of the show, so I don't want to make too much out of it. Yeah, that'll do. Those are details, those figures. So I'll get to them later. I know, they're real people. No person is a detail. True, but as figures in my paintings, sorry, they're just details. All right, it's coming along well-ish. Now that I'm getting some of the major values dropped in and some of the color story that I wanted, things are looking a little more clear. I had a value story from my sketch, but I didn't really have a clear color story. It was just in my head. I wanted a limited number of colors, warms and cools, bleeding together in what I consider this very Venetian kind of a way. And that effect is happening. So that's good. I want to keep that up. I don't want to fight against it. I want to establish this bridge. I mean, it's important compositionally, but it is behind this, so it doesn't want to pull forward. So I'm going to paint it in some of these warm bricky tones, but it's a lot of words. Not too dark. That's where I'm going. Not too dark. I'll use some of this burnt sienna, water it down a little. I'm using this mid-size, smallish, flat brush, and I'm going to paint a little bit with the flat part of the bristles as a blade to kind of pick out certain strings of brick, because I can use it then to drop in some other colors to help mottle that as well. A really nice complement to the bricky terracotta tones of burnt sienna is this cobalt teal, which I'm addicted to. But this greenish blue, I'm hoping mixed with the reddish tones here and there will effectively translate that story of this seaside town. A lot of that color you see there, olive greens and teals. Yes, I'm romanticizing mold, but you know, why not? But anyway, the teal and this terracotta red or burnt sienna or anything in that family, it's a very nice marriage of complementary tones. Neither are too dark. They're both sort of mid-range, so cool and warm, and they marry up really nicely. I do mix colors in my palette sometimes, but I prefer not to generally. I like to use pure color on the surface of the page, like here, to pure colors to mix organically on the surface of the paper. That's what I think watercolor does better than any other medium in the world. So I love to try to allow it to do its thing as much as I can. And that's the kind of thing you can plan on, but you can't plan exactly. You can know what's going to happen, but You just have to allow it to do what it wants to do. So here I want to paint the underside of the bridge. It's dark and I don't want to get fancy about it and paint any glowing uplights like I sometimes do. I'm not doing that here because I want this bridge to look a little farther away. When it's drier, I'm going to paint some streaks over it to sort of obscure it a little and get it to fade out. So I just want to treat it a fairly straightforward way. So I'm starting off with the mineral violet, then I'm washing it down into some of the permanent orange. So it's the same complement that I started the painting with, but with a little less water, a little bit more pigment. Yeah, generally okay. I don't want this to get too bright because it is farther away. So I'll drop a little bit more of a complement of the violet into that. It'll be all right. This will have to get a little darker, that corner, even though it might pick up some light for the story of the painting. That whole thing is going to want to get darker. Definitely as it turns the corner, that needs to get quite dark before I'm done. So I should be okay. Now I want to dissolve that down. I'm just going to feather it out with a dry-ish flat brush. You do see a little bit of water here in the canal, but so little I don't know that I should make anything out of it. I mean, by that I mean I don't know that I should try to paint it. Dropping a little bit of that cobalt teal in the very bottom. That's all right. I think I'm letting my mind think too much about that. It's not that important. So far, so good. The values here are stronger than they appear here, and I know that's not what I want, but as I said, this area will get darker, so I think I'm okay. I am going to take my mist bottle and mist this bridge on the side to help intentionally obscure some of those edges and colors and encourage them to marry up and run together a little. Keep the clarity here and get rid of it as it starts to descend off the paper. Yeah, just that little bit helped. It softened that, made it look a little mistier, which is what I want. This is not dry, but I think dry enough. You can glimpse a building back here, and then it turns the corner as these people are walking across the bridge. So obviously it's not a focal issue, so I don't want to make too much out of it. But there are a couple of windows, so I'm just going to use some of these neutral violet tones. I think I want a smaller flat brush. This is these beautiful perla flats by Escoda. Common, very small to pretty large. This is a number 4, so pretty small perla flats. I also notice I didn't clean it out, so it's a bit of a mess. Anyway, I want these because I just want to dry brush in just a hint of these windows in this more distant building. I don't want to get too fancy. A little goes a long way. This is one of these old metal braces they screw into the walls to keep the buildings from falling down. Yeah, I think that's enough. I use some of the same tone with a larger flat brush, the violet that is, to turn the corner. And just scrape it and fade it out as it goes off the top of the page. This design attitude, or I don't know what to call it, methodology of figuring out what your center of focus is, has been very helpful to me, because I know that if the center of focus, for example, is here, that's where all the money goes. That's where all my attention, or if I'm going to stress it all, it has to be there. And then when you get up here, for example, or off the bottom, the edges of the painting can really be much more gestural and allowed to just fade out and not be that, not worry about them. And so you don't over bake them. It's a really good method for me I've developed over the years, but it also helps me to do much larger paintings sometimes when I want. They don't feel so daunting when I really know it's just a smaller area. It gets much of the attention, and then big swaths of the painting are either not touched or barely touched. And yeah, it's just a good way for me to approach painting in general, but certainly larger scale paintings. This painting is only a quarter sheet, so 15 by 11 or so, not big. But even at this scale, centering your focal point, making it more obvious, more clear, both to you and to your viewer, is just a really good way of efficiently using your time and not wasting your time detailing parts of the painting that are way out of the center of focus. Like little things like that, I know just to fade them. I don't have to be so picky and make sure that reads crisp and cleanly all the way up. It doesn't make the painting better if it does. In fact, often worse. So here I'm painting with a combination of some more of that violet and also some of the sepia, for now at least, the darker sides of these elements. So I'm starting now to flirt with the darkest darks of the painting, at least working up to them, moving into the darker midtones into the darkest darks. Still using that very small Escoda flat. If you use as much pigment as it can hold, it can make a very crisp, dark mark. And if you only lightly load it, you can get these really beautiful, scratchy, dry brush marks, which are not for everybody, I know. I love them, and I think for a place like Venice, they really make sense, where texture is such a big deal, and one thing just bleeds so organically into another thing. It's such a watercolor way of looking at the world, and Venice has that going on in spades. So this level of detail, a little bit more value, yes, but a little more clarity starts to pull this assembly forward of that, which is what I want. This is an 1/8 of an inch flat, just adding additional textural elements. I may be sorry, but I don't think so. Okay. So while I'm doing it, I'm going to just keep going with this slightly darker tone around the corner, and then I'll bring it down into this area too. I often do these demonstrations for you when it's raining here in New York, and it's not raining today. It's very humid and hot out though, which is fine. I don't mind summer at all. Here I'm just studying what color story makes sense. I'm trying to model the colors a bit because it's just appropriate for the place. So here I'm putting in a little cobalt blue, a little violet, a little brown. All fine. The colors don't matter that much. It's really more of a value study, but one thing informs the other. Here there's this old marble coping though right off the front of this edge, so dropping in some teal and some blue. And then before it dries or has a chance to dry, I'll leaven it with a little bit of the brown and probably some violet before I'm done. Hoping to leave some skip marks, some textural things going on in there. So the brush is loaded with more pigment than water in this case, so it just aids in my ability to leave a little bits of white. Not white, but lighter marks, just to help enhance the textural story. Right here on the leading edge, this is some neutral tint, just to really crisp up that edge, but darken it significantly. This is a Holbein neutral tint, so it's not a black, not really a gray. Well, it's a grayish violet. It's very transparent. It's very neutral. So it's sort of a almost equal mixture of warm and cool tones. Not as chalky as black paint, but very neutral. Aptly named. So into this dark, wet corner, I'm going to drag in some character shadows from this edge. Try to keep them looking a little irregular and scratchy. As I said, the very leading edge of this, I want to get it a little darker than the bridge behind. It's sort of an optical illusion game I'm playing. Doesn't have to be jet black, but just a little darker. Okay, the thing I don't dislike anything in there, but before it's too late, there's something I need to address that I don't like, and that is how the shadow abruptly stops at the edge of the steps. I don't I don't want that. It all has to bleed together. But I have a couple of minutes that's quite wet. So I'll just do a little finesse work over here first. But I don't want to paint the shadow on the stairs as dark as this. So what I'm going to do is into that wet, darker wash, this is some lighter violet. The flat brush, I'm just going to allow it to bleed into that to connect one shape to the other. Then feather it over into the steps and feather it out so that I keep some of these character marks, but connect the two shapes so it doesn't look so abrupt. Also, I love shadows. It's because we don't paint light in watercolor, we really do spend most of our time painting shadows. So I think a lot, perhaps too much, about painting shades and shadows. I try to inject a lot of luminosity and beauty and character into them as much as I'm able, because that's where all the color goes to charge itself up. So I just love these effects. That's quite wet, so there's time to screw it up. You can play around with this if you want. For some reason, which I may regret, I think I'm going to drop a little bit of red. I think I want it to sing off some of those dusky greens. This is not a cad red, but a Mayan orange, a Daniel Smith color. It sort of feels much like cadmium red, but it's not. It's much more transparent, less chalky. So I think, yeah, this wasn't a bad choice, but a little of that goes a long way. Just gives those dark shadows a little more energy. All right, enough of that. All right, so this is starting to develop nicely. This wasn't quite as dry, so I have a feathery edge there. Not a big deal. I can clean that up later. I do not want this much crisp white, I think, on that bridge. It tends to make it look too prominent, so I'm going to take a little bit of raw umber. It's just a light warm. And somewhat in that way I treated the steps here. I'm going to paint over this, but not solidly. I'm going to feather in some of this raw umber just over everything to knock back a little of that pure white here and there, but also to add some additional character and texture to this whole assembly. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's nice. It makes the bridge, I think, fall back into space so it'll look a little less prominent. Probably time to break out the hairdryer again, or I'm going to be giving you a demonstration on watercolor repairs, which I'm happy to do, but I'd rather not. Although it's true, watercolor has this reputation of being one and done. And once it's down, it's finished, and there's nothing you can do. And if you made a mistake, your life is over. That's nonsense. The truth is there's almost always something you can do. Meaning you can fix a lot of what you don't like in a watercolor, or changes, or repairs, or way more than you might think you're able to. Much of my early career, I did watercolors, but commercially for architects and developers. I'm an architect, and I did my first million years of my career were spent doing architectural illustration. I did love it for a long time. That profession's changed a great deal. But what I'm hinting at here is that a big part of that was not mistakes I had to change, but design changes that would happen. I mean, I would work sometimes for a week or two on these giant competition watercolors, and then at the last minute I'd get a call saying they've added 20 floors to a building, or worse, taken out 20 floors. What can you do? Are we doomed? Well, the answer was almost never, yes, we're doomed. The answer was, yeah, I can do something. Anyway, over the years, I became sort of a reluctant expert in repairing watercolors, meaning washing off certain areas, making really what looked like impossible changes happen. I didn't like to let any client know that any of this was possible, or they'd become too reliant on it. But some of them figured it out over time. Clever beasts. So yeah, but anyway, it was liberating, because now I do know that within reason, there are some things that are beyond the pale. But within reason, if something goes wrong in a watercolor, there is almost always something you can do to bring it back from the abyss. Okay, so here I want to go a little darker on this shade side. I think I'm going to use just this sepia for now, feather it out. Yeah, I think that's okay. The rhythm is important. This needs to be darker than that, so I don't want to go too dark way back there. And this is dark, but it isn't jet black, so I have to be a little cautious that I don't go too dark way back here. So that was sepia, and now I'm toggling it into a little bit of cobalt blue. Again, color doesn't matter that much. It's just the values. Yeah, pretty good. I don't mind the fact that the top of this looks a little obscure. As it dries, I'll do I have some tricks planned for up there. One thing I've noticed is my little city, I was very subtle because I didn't want to kill the light, but I think I was a little too subtle and you can't see anything. So while I'm here, I'll just hit the profile again with a little more of the orange. And this is more like just cerulean yellow, but just here and there. So I want it to look ghosty and mysterious, and I think that does. Sorry, a little bit of something found its way into the yellow. Way up here, a little bit of character work on the cornices and shadows, but we're pretty far out of the center of interest, so I want to be judicious and discreet about anything I put up this high into the painting. Meaning a little goes a long way. So many arches in Venice have these beautiful iron trusses that connect through space. I mean, I could ignore them, but I love them, so. Oh, yeah. So while I'm up here, I think I'll do whatever I'm going to do. This is just raw umber, so it's a warmish, yellowish warm. Not too dark, that's the main thing. So I just want to add texture more than anything, not exactly specific detail. And a good way to do that is to use some of these start and stop marks. So if you want to paint in an arch, you just fade it out by using dry brush, or just lift off your brush and just where the line starts and then stops. Similar to the way that I dry brush these, I started at either end and I lifted the pressure off in the middle so it doesn't connect, and it just gives the effect that the light is bleaching out a lot of that detail that might otherwise be visible. It's just another quality of not just watercolor, but painting in general, and that is the power of what you don't see. Often the power of a painting lies in what's not painted as much as what is painted. Like leaving some things unpainted or half painted, and leaving some mystery, some problem to be solved by the viewer. The viewer can fill in the blanks and use their own imagination. It's not only a beautiful way to paint, but it's a great way to involve the viewing public in what you're doing. You get them interested and invested in trying to almost kind of solve a puzzle, to fill in the blanks. You don't have to tell people everything. That was a very, very hard lesson for me to learn, and I'm still learning it if I'm honest, but coming from that world of architectural illustration where, God forbid, you leave one window out of a 40-story building, it's quite different in the world of fine art, where you can paint one or two windows in the same 40-story building and it looks so much better and it's so much easier, and the viewer knows exactly what you're doing just by hinting, just by glimpsing. A little glimpse of detail often is more powerful than hours and hours of maniacally painted detail. Now, that doesn't mean you can't do that. There are painters who are extremely adept at painting highly photorealistic almost, but at least very realistic paintings of subjects where more detail is what they want. It's what they're doing. It's their aesthetic. So I'm not disparaging them. It can be very beautiful, but it's not my aesthetic. And but I've come by it honestly because I think it used to be. It was forced upon me, and then I found a new way that works better for me. Probably that's because I was just stuck doing it in one way all of my life, and I wouldn't say I rebelled against it so much as I just was curious in finding other ways of expression. Similar to my attitude with masking fluid, in those days, I would spend days and days masking out windows and cornices on buildings. And then an equal number of days it seemed peeling it off when the painting was done. And nowadays I just have developed an allergy to masking fluid. I don't use it, even in cases where I probably should. I don't, just because I can't stand the thought of it or the smell of it. So it's a personal thing. It's not really an aesthetic choice as much as just a personal one. So I'm not saying you shouldn't use it. If it works for you, you should absolutely use it. But if it doesn't, for whatever reason, don't. But the truth is, there's no one right answer, of course. My students in my classes, I mean, generally I think they like me, but there are things I do that frustrate some of my students that are really struggling. They want answers. They want me to tell them, do this, don't do that. Use masking fluid, don't use masking fluid, for example. And it's just not me. I can't do that. If it works for you, if it fits into your aesthetic, absolutely use masking fluid. If you can't stand the sight or smell of it, or you just don't like the look of it, then don't. But it can be made to work. If it feels right to you, then there's something to be listened to. And if it feels wrong to you, there's something to be listened to that way too. And I think I'm just using that as an example about aesthetics in general and finding our own voice, overused term, as artists, though it's true. A lot of it is designing your aesthetic, designing your life. What works for you? It doesn't have to be what works for me. In fact, I encourage my students to question everything I say and reject it if they want to. If it doesn't ring true to them, there's something that should be listened to, and that is your instinct. So if they're listening to me prattle on and I say something that that doesn't square, that's important. Figuring out what you don't like in this world can be just as powerful as figuring out what you do like. And that is absolutely true in painting. And in figuring out your aesthetic, whatever it may be. So I have invented a little sort of an opposite balustrade here, stepping down to the water. It's not there in reality, but I thought it would be a good anchor to the side of the painting, and it would be a good opportunity for me to cast another shadow, which would tie into this figure and help anchor the whole painting. So that's why I put that there. Now that I see this a little further on, I think a little hint of green in the water. And it's almost a detail, but I don't think it would be a mistake, so I'm going to use some real green. Just lying in my palette here, but there's a little bit of a viridian, which I rarely use, but it is a nice, as a color, a very pure green. Like it doesn't have a lot of yellow necessarily, or blue, or anything in it. Too large an area of viridian, though, it can dry quite flat and gray, so I don't tend to keep it in my palette, but I was using it for some other painting, and so there it is. I'm listening to my old lessons about painting water, and I always tell my students less is almost always more when you're painting water. Fewer marks, just let the fluidity of the paint do its thing. This is such a tiny area, though, it doesn't much matter. Yeah, but I think it's a nice little jewel. Little viridian drop there. It kind of helps give a little electricity to the worms. This is bugging me, I'll get to it, but I want to crisp up that corner. It's pretty important for the whole composition. It's easy to do though. But I want to make sure this is quite dry before I do it. But while I'm here, I'm going to paint in this It's not a mirror image of that, but it's just another balustrade, largely in shadow and a dark element. So it's just sepia washed down into some raw umber. The value is good and it tells me how dark. That needs to be almost as dark as this. A little bit of violet. And if it melts into that green, that's cool, no problem. The main thing is though, I want this to melt into the shadow that I want to make across the foreground. For that, I'm going to use a bit more of this violet and probably some, yeah, this is cobalt, but it has some violet mixed in just by mistake, but that's okay. I want this shadow, because it's more in the foreground, to be slightly more graphic than most things. This is pretty graphic, and this, that's okay. This avenue of light is important. And then ultimately, this darker foreground shadow, again, as I said, I hope will anchor the bottom of the painting, but also marry up to the standing figure. So I'm not quite ready to paint her entirely yet, soon. So I'll just feather this violet tone up so I don't have an unnecessary dark line there. Yeah, and that's a good way to connect to a shape without having to paint it all entirely yet. Yes. Our errant little scratch mark or whatever is back. Okay, so at this point I'm going to use the dryer and just make sure everything's dry, because now it's time for the darkest dark elements here, a little bit of work here, definitely here, and the main figure, and then the ancillary figures in the back, and then we'll assess and see if anything else needs to be done, but not much. Just did a time check. I'm okay. I'm trying to keep these videos to around a 90-minute mark, so I just have a couple of minutes left. But should be enough for me to do the outstanding elements, and then if there are a few little things, I'll finish off camera, but not too much. The palette in this, you know, it's very Venetian colors, but it's all pretty soft. There's no real bright glaring colors, and that, I think, that's what I wanted. That again is an aesthetic choice. May not be the choice you'd make, but that's all right. When you do your painting, you can use whatever colors you like. Yes, it's YouTube. There are plenty of people happy to tell me what I've done wrong. It's quite all right. I don't mind at all. But the bottom line is, hey, it's my painting. You do yours, you can do what you like. So I'm just, these look like fussy little details, and in fact they kind of are, but I'm just using little hot spots of value here to crisp up this leading edge. Yeah, that's already better. It's just this very quick dry brush marks. This is largely just sepia, just a dark, warm tone. It doesn't need that much. Again, I'm trying to keep the dynamic range of values of the whole painting a little closer, you know, not so extreme as it's pure black to pure white, but a little narrower. It's one thing. It's not always true of Venice, but often it is that the light feels a bit filtered and softer. So you get a lot of subtle variations of color and value. Okay. The little figures I'll probably do off camera, but I think I need to paint the main standing figure because she is the last remaining value-based compositional element to go in. Overall, the figure wants to belong to these dark shapes, but she would be getting some light, especially on her right side, our left side, I guess her left side too. So I don't want to make the figure solidly dark. However, I want her to hang together as a dark shape. So I don't know how much color I want to work into her. I don't think this is the kind of painting where I'd want to give her really bright colored clothing. I think it would look out of place. The overall painting is pretty subtle and understated on purpose. So I'm using one of these mops, but a small one, so I can get some crisp edges. Oh, I took this reference photo that I started with in Venice in the winter time, so people are wearing heavy coats. Obviously, I could change that, but I don't think I mentioned that earlier, but that was one of the effects I was hoping to get, was kind of this soft, more indirect, wintry light. It still has oranges and golds in it in the evening, but overall the light's a little softer. I'm a little torn whether to make her coat warm or cool. I think cool, there's sort of a dominance of warm overall. So for complement's sake, I'll drop in a little bit of cobalt, and this is some manganese, just on her sunnier side. Yeah, I think cool is the way to go, but that coloration is too bright, but it's okay. I'll toggle that into some French Ultra, darker, less fresh blue. I'll leave a little white. I'll save that. I might want to use that as just trim on a hood on her coat or something. Not the kind of details I normally get into, but because there's just one central figure and she is so central, a little bit more specificity, I think, is not a bad thing. So here on her shade side, I'm just dropping in some neutral tint on top of that French Ultra blue wash under. Save just a thread of light where the strap of her bag might be. Yeah, so there's just a glow there that's nice, and now it gets nice and dusky and shadowier on this side, which is generally what I want. See how correct I am. I'm sure all the YouTube experts will be happy to tell me where I've gone wrong. It's all right. I talk a lot about painting figures in my classes, but even when they're this figural and focal, I think it's maybe a mistake to get too detailed in general if it's overall sort of a sketch-based painting, which this is. So if you're a little tighter and more specific at the top of the figure, especially this triangle here, the head, neck, and shoulders, I think the bottom of the figures can get a little looser, and it generally feels right. And in this case, she's walking out of a shadow, so it wouldn't be inappropriate for the bottom of her figure to just melt a little bit into the shadows and not be as defined as the top part. So I swapped out to back to this 1/8 inch flat brush, and I'm just being a little more gestural with her legs and feet. But she is pretty front and center, so it needs to be a complete figure. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. She's carrying a bag. I don't know, whatever. I think I'll use some deep warm tones just as a little compliment there. Not a big deal. This is burnt sienna, although there does seem to be left in the palette a little of that Mayan orange, so it's pretty warm. It's okay. I use a little of the sepia on the back end and then just let it bleed into the coat so all things feel connected. That is one of my goals as a painter, is to make sure that everything in my painting looks connected and not as if it's just pasted on somehow or as if it's wandered in from another painting. So even though she's sort of the star of the show and deserves a little attention and love, she still has to belong to the whole composition. Yeah, not bad at all, but I think still here I need to go a little fresher on some of those edge tones. I'm gonna scrape over what I've already done, but with the flat brush, a little more cobalt blue in a more irregular way. Adding some character but texture to the frontal part of that wall. I'll be a little cautious. This could be where it starts to look overcooked, and I don't want that. So I think this is good, but a little of this probably goes a long way. But yeah, that's fine. Same thing in a smaller way back here on the bridge in the distance. I want a little bit of character, shadowy patina mark under the coping at the top of the bridge. A little bit of irregularity in the stonework. Again, always being cognizant that I want this bridge to look further away, so I don't want to do too much that it begins to visually pull forward. And I'm flirting with that now, so I'll just back off on that. These figures, I'll just treat as shapes, just simple shapes of slightly darker value using warm tones just because I was using it, but I think it's kind of appropriate. No detail. Even they could be a little lighter, so let's soften them a bit. And since we're so nearly done with all elements, I'll paint in the little peeps back here. I think this figure I will save as if she's just walking in light. Whether it makes that much sense or not doesn't bother me. I think I'll just pretend that it does. And this is just watered down cobalt, has a little bit of gray in it, so it's not very fresh, but that's kind of okay. Top parts of these two figures that are walking into the light need to be silhouetted. The bottom of them is not too critical at all. This guy could use just a little more attention. And for the most part, there we go. As this dries, I'll assess what else I'll do. I want to do a little bit of value adjustment here. I still think this whole assembly wants to pull forward more. The work I did here helped. I want to do something similar to this part to pull it away from the bridge a little bit, because it's not, I didn't throw it in full sun because the sun is really coming from behind. So I didn't want to, but I couldn't leave it all white. So it's sort of a delicate balance of midtones here in the center, but generally it's working. I'm happy with the value balance, the rhythm of dark, not as dark, not as dark, not as dark, but all these darks, this dark light rhythm works quite well, and I think this more central figure balances off sort of this triad of darks well. The light here speaks to the light here, speaks to the light here, and a secondary triangle. The steps I wanted to leave lighter. I think they're probably a little too light, but it's not such a big deal. I wanted a little thread, a strip of light coming on this upper walkway. So yeah, the pattern of light works well, I think, generally. I'll probably knock those down just a little, so you'll read this sort of circular pattern of light more than a triangle, and then this triangle of dark intersecting. All the rest, as I say, is more mid-tone, so less important. Yeah, overall, I hope you learned something or got some helpful tips of what to do or maybe not to do, and got some good ideas. So thank you all for watching. Happy painting, and I'll see you very soon.